Okay, so that then is an example of what is driving the ship really is political and economic power. The religion is a second order window dressing and rationalization, right, for a fundamental structure here. Okay, so that's the Marxist explanation in a nutshell for religion under feudalism and how it fits that theoretical model. Now, feudalism then gives way over the course of a couple of centuries to capitalism. And what's the nature of capitalism? Well, there are lots of arguments that the capitalists have with the feudalists over political and economic issues. Capitalists are arguing everybody should be equal under the law as opposed to being hierarchical under feudalism. The capitalists are arguing everybody should be free rather than being bound to a certain sorts of classes, right, and so forth. And so that debate occurs at the political and economic level. But the Marxists will point out that it's not an accident, right, historically, that as capitalism is mounting a major challenge to feudalism, within religion, Protestantism is giving a radical challenge to Catholicism. So we have, at the same time, there's a transition from the religion of feudalism, Catholicism, to a more modern, right, approach to religion that is Protestantism. The economic battles and political battles are going on at the same time. Now, suppose we just say, or couch the terms of the debate rather in theological terms. We say, well, what are the Protestants and the Catholics going back and forth about us? And so we get into all those Reformation and Counter-Reformation issues. And we can say that one of the issues, for example, is the debate over whether Scripture, right, or the Bible should be available to the masses in their vernacular languages, or whether Scripture should only be published in Latin. And there are any number of very nasty battles between Protestant Catholics over this particular issue, of course. For example, in England, there were English translations, right, of the Bible that started to appear shortly after the Reformation took place in the 1520s or 30s or so. And those translations were illegal, right? King Henry VIII at that time was still a good Catholic. William Tyndale was the publisher of one of the early translations. All of the king's horses and all the king's men went after Tyndale. They rounded up as many of the copies of this English translation of the Bible as they could and burned them. Tyndale was forced to flee to the continent. He remained in hiding for a number of years, but he was eventually tracked down. He was brought back to England and executed, right, for a form of heresy. Now, what's the argument here? Well, Tyndale, as an early Protestant, is arguing that people should be able to read Scripture, right, for themselves, anybody who's literate, and the Protestants are very big on everybody learning how to read and having basic literacy so that they can read Scripture, so that they can have a right relationship with God. And so it's important then to take the Bible, which is only available in Latin right up to this point, and translate it into English so that the people can do so. That is to say, everybody should have equal access to this literature, and everybody should be free to read it and interpret it for themselves, so that they can be responsible for their own soul and getting in relation properly with God, so to speak. And the Catholic counter-argument on theological grounds is to say, well, you know, something like the following: religion is very difficult. If we just let any old yokel read Scripture for himself, then people are bound to get lots and lots of it wrong, in which case their souls are going to be imperiled. And also there's going to be all kinds of divisions, because once the cat is out of the bag and we say anybody can read a Scripture and anybody's interpretation is as good as anybody else's, right, so to speak, then people are going to disagree with each other, and all of the social cohesion of Christendom is going to fall apart, and we're just going to have a whole bunch of bickering factions within religion. And so it's much better if we entrust the proper interpretation of Scripture to authorities who are well-trained, well-educated, well-versed in the tradition of scriptural authority. And on the behalf of Christians every way, we present to them an authorized, right, interpretation. So that then is to say, it's proper, right, that we have everybody kept together in a social group, and that we have a division of labor, intellectually speaking, that we have a specially trained hierarchy, right, a class of individuals whose job is to look after the soul right, of all of Christendom and appropriately to interpret Scripture for them. And so the laity shouldn't be reading Scripture in their own right. Instead, the priests, when they go to school and at seminary, they will get the proper interpretation. They will deliver it to the laity, and then people higher up in the hierarchy will sort out proper interpretation. All right. Now that, of course, is to couch the battle between Protestants and Catholics in theological terms, right? This debate between hierarchy and equality, being bound to a given centralized interpretation versus being free to make your own interpretation, right, in strictly religious terms. But what the Marxists, right, will want to argue is that really the debate between the Protestants and the capitalists is not over theological matters. It's not fundamentally over theological matters. That's a second-order manifestation of more fundamental social forces at work. What we have in the transition from feudalism to capitalism is a new, right, ideology and a new set of economic forces giving rise to that ideology that makes the individual central, that sees the individual as equal to all other individuals and wants to make the individual free. Religious matters are simply one manifestation, right, of that underlying set of economic, right, imperatives. So what happens then as feudalism's hold weakens, that makes space for capitalism, and then capitalism, right, proceeds, right, in its economic way to reshape all of society's institutions, including religious institutions, in its own vision, right, so to speak. And so the development of Protestantism with the development of capitalism from the Marxist perspective makes perfectly good sense. Now what we then have is a evolved religion, right, that is serving the same function from the Marxist perspective that all religions serve, right? It is to justify and make manifest, right, to the broad mass of people what capitalism's core institutions are. And certainly within Protestantism, as Protestantism comes to be the dominant religion in the capitalist nations, right, of the world, right, the gospel of equality and the gospel of liberty become, right, all important in that particular situation. But then as this economic logic plays out from the Marxist perspective, as the class conflict becomes stronger, as the antagonism between the classes becomes more marked, as the relationship between the two becomes more hostile, the ways in which religion is used, right, by capitalism in order to continue to maintain its grip on power becomes a little bit darker.